The document of truth, the 70 weeks, and the restoration of the covenant. 1. The context of captivity and the law of the husband. The story begins in Babylon. The house of Judah is in captivity, but the deeper tragedy is the spiritual state of the house of Israel. Centuries earlier, the northern kingdom of the house of Israel was divorced by God and taken into captivity by Assyria. Under the law of the husband, the spiritual reality discussed by the Apostle Paul in Romans, a divorced wife cannot remarry without committing adultery as long as her husband lives. The house of Israel was legally and spiritually bound, unable to return to her husband as long as her husband lives. Daniel, a slave in Babylon, understands this plight. He has read the prophecies of Jeremiah regarding the 70-year servitude of the house of Judah, but his prayer is much larger. He is not just asking for a release from physical slavery, he is interceding for the spiritual redemption of the house of Israel, a people sifted through the Gentile nations. He begs for the return to the land, for mercy, and for the restoration of the covenant. 2. The decree and the first chronological engine. The answer to Daniel's prayer is not merely a decree for construction. It is the announcement of the Messiah. The angel Gabriel reveals that the timeline of redemption begins with the command to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. This decree, granted by Artaxerxes I to Ezra in 457 BC, serves as the legal anchor for the entire prophecy. It was a transfer of sovereignty. It granted the house of Judah full judicial and civil autonomy. It authorized Ezra to appoint magistrates, enforce the law of God as state law, and manage regional taxation. This created the organized polity necessary for the Messiah to arrive and fulfill the law. 3. The fallacy of the split timeline. Common interpretations today introduce an arbitrary gap or split between the 69th and 70th week of Daniel's prophecy. We must reject this as unscriptural, illogical, and historically unfounded. The 70 weeks must be understood exactly as they were written, a single, continuous, and absolute chronological countdown. There is no historical, legal, or cultural record of any ancient civilization utilizing a split timeline to track a single binding decree or mission. Time, by its very definition and function, is continuous. Consider the legal framework of a judicial ruling. To suggest that a judge would issue a definitive 70-week sentence, execute the first 69 weeks, and then indefinitely suspend the final week, for thousands of years, is a complete rejection of the literal, historical definition of time. A legal decree initiates a continuous clock. Once the decree is given, the statute of limitations and the countdown of the sentence run uninterrupted until fulfilled. Furthermore, a divided timeline contradicts the immediate scriptural context. Daniel's inquiry was sparked by his study of Jeremiah's prophecy regarding the 70 years of Babylonian captivity. Those 70 years of exile were a literal, continuous block of time. There was no pause or gap in the punishment. Because the 70-week, 490-year prophecy was given as the direct counterpart to the 70-year exile, it demands the same chronological integrity. Just as the exile did not pause, the prophetic clock of restoration and redemption was not paused. The phrase 70 weeks are determined indicates a fixed, measured, and unbroken unit of time allotted to accomplish a specific, continuous work. To insert a gap of thousands of years into the final moments of this prophecy is to force a modern, speculative interpretation onto an ancient, unbroken legal decree. The timeline is an exact, absolute sequence from the decree to the fulfillment. 4. The 62-week fulfillment, the first advent. The 62 weeks were fulfilled with the complete transition of the nation from a subject people under a Persian decree, 457 BC, as documented in Ezra chapter 7, to the manifestation and ultimate sacrifice of the Messiah, AD 34. The ministry of the Messiah during this period was defined by a specific legal constraint. When Jesus declared that he was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, he was addressing a twofold legal reality. The house of Judah had been preserved within the marriage covenant to ensure the legal lineage necessary to bring forth the Messiah. He could not have been birthed by a people divorced for harlotry. However, the house of Israel had been previously divorced and was legally barred from returning under the law of the husband. Jesus' mission was the precise legal instrument required to reconcile these statuses. His life and ministry engaged the lost sheep of both houses to resolve their conditions. He maintained the purity of the line through the house of Judah and provided the death required by the law of the husband to legally release the house of Israel from her divorce. By his death, he finalized the requirements of the law, making the remarriage of the entire covenant people to God possible. Following the cutting off of the Messiah, the Roman armies, the people of the prince who is to come, carried out the desolations of the city and the sanctuary, an event that spans the judgment described in both verses 26 and 27. 5. The Messianic fulfillment of Daniel 9:27. The final week is often misunderstood by those who jump to a different subject in the final verse. We must adhere to the grammatical continuity of the text. Grammatical continuity. The he in verse 27 is the same anointed one identified in verses 25 and 26. To introduce a new subject, an antichrist, is a departure from the text. The Messiah is the subject throughout. The new covenant, the strong covenant, Higbir, is the new covenant of the gospel. Christ did not negotiate a political treaty. He established the eternal covenant of salvation through his blood, as confirmed in Matthew 26:28. The cessation of sacrifice and the 7-year ministry. Christ's exclusive ministry to the house of Israel spanned exactly 7 years, fulfilling the final prophetic week. This period officially began with his baptism by John the Baptist, the moment God first declared him to be his son. In the very middle of this week, 3.5 years later, he was crucified. By becoming the final Lamb of God, he caused the animal sacrifices of the old system to cease forever, making the entire temple system obsolete at the exact moment of the cross. The final half of this week continued through the apostles' preaching, concluding precisely at the end of the 7 years with the murder of the disciple Stephen and the subsequent opening of the gospel to the Gentiles with Cornelius. 6. The 7-week sign, the second advent. While the 62 weeks define the first advent, the 7 weeks represent a secondary future-oriented cycle. Just as the first period began with a decree to restore and rebuild, we are currently witnessing the modern, physical fulfillment of the prophecy from Daniel 9:25. The street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublous times. This prophetic timeline began in 2013, the year that marked the commencement of the work to physically rebuild this street and wall. The Pilgrimage Road, the ancient 2,000-year-old thoroughfare connecting the Pool of Siloam to the Temple Mount, is the tangible realization of this prophecy. The project was formally ordered and initiated in 2013 by the Israel Antiquities Authority and the City of David Foundation. Its excavation was definitively characterized by troubled times. The monumental effort required complex, years-long engineering beneath the modern, densely populated neighborhood of Silwan. Builders and archaeologists had to continuously navigate immense logistical challenges, intense international scrutiny, and deep local political sensitivities. After more than a decade of labor, this monumental route, the ancient street and its structural retaining walls, was successfully restored to its original state and open to the public, mirroring the ancient prophetic conditions to the letter. 7. Conclusion. The 70 weeks of Daniel are not a fragmented riddle, but the heartbeat of the story of truth. By removing the imaginary gaps and returning to the chronological reality of the text, we see the Messiah at the center of all history. From the judicial decree of 457 BC to the sacrificial cross of AD 34, and now to the physical uncovering of the Jerusalem streets in our own day, the prophecy stands as an unbroken divine timeline leading from the first advent to the second.